Welcome to our fourth and final panel in our series on envisioning an evidence-based education ecosystem. Today's panel is going to bring perspectives from experts in digital learning who have dedicated their careers to studying and advocating for policies and practices that harness the affordances of technology to improve educational outcomes. My name is Carrie Friedman. I am a principal researcher at SRI and director of the Learn Network. The Learn Network is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences to support the scaling of evidence-based practices and programs that accelerate learning. At the Learn Network, we facilitate capacity building for education researchers and developers, and we also support engagement activities with educators in order to support bridging research to practice and building useful evidence-based products that can achieve widespread and sustainable scale. I'm very pleased to introduce our series moderator, Dr. Victoria Schaefer, who's been with us for 3 conversations thus far, entering into our final conversation. Victoria is a director and senior manager on our SRI's teacher quality and systems reform team. Her education career demonstrates a commitment to bridging research and practice, and her work has supported educators to improve opportunities for all students. She currently leads a portfolio of work that builds school and community partnerships, bringing together schools, law enforcement, first responders, and mental health providers to identify and support students. Victoria served as the director of the Regional Educational Lab for Appalachia, where, of course, bringing evidence-based practices to educators is the top priority. And today we're talking about something that's been on everyone's mind, everyone's tongue. If you've been to a conference, you've heard it. We're talking about AI. And before we dive too deep into that, I'm just going to contextualize our conversation. So we are living in a time where there's a wealth of information about what good teaching and learning looks like. And we call that evidence of what works. And researchers have built this evidence, and what we mean is that they've studied effective ways to teach math and reading, such as interventions that could improve student achievement. And this is true across multiple content areas, not just math and reading. So as a nation, we have a lot of documentation on how to teach and how to lead schools and how to help students thrive. But at the same time, we're also observing the rise of some cutting edge technology, innovative teaching methods, expansion of AI. And that is all in the context of data from our National Assessment of Educational Progress showing that reading and math scores for grades 4 and 8 are still below pre-pandemic levels. So these scores maybe offer a different kind of evidence, the outcome of our efforts, and according to this one measure, what our schools are producing. And the contrast between this and the evidence that we have about what works and the rise of innovation raises some concerns, and people want to know how to better leverage the evidence for what works and this new technology to improve educational outcomes. So the conversation today is around mobilizing what we know works to meet this moment, and address some new questions in education. Also to be visionary and imagine an education system where using and generating evidence in teaching and learning becomes just what we do. So I'll pass it back to you, Victoria, because you look like you have a phone, and then we can get started talking to our experts.
All right, great. Thank you, and thank you to our audience. We are grateful. Technology works, except when it doesn't. So, thank you, Carrie, for setting this up. What I want to do to kick this off, I want to acknowledge there's so many ways we can take this conversation about AI. And I'm sure those folks who are joining us are hanging on our every word and they're ready to hear from Erin and Susan. How I would like to situate this is starting with your vision of the future. To me, that's important. So what I'd like to do is say, please take us to this future moment and describe this future state, what does an evidence-based education ecosystem that is highly leveraging, well utilizing AI look like? Paint that picture for me. And maybe, Erin, can we start with you?
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. And I love contextualizing myself in the future. So let's talk about what I want as a mom, as an educator, and a technologist for the future of learning. Because I wear all those hats and I do it so much interchangeably, and like many of you. So when I think about what is possible, when I think about the future of education, a lot of what I think about is the ability to meet all students where they are, to navigate what we already know about the learning sciences. We're going to talk about a lot about evidence today, but we do know a lot about the learning sciences, and we're learning more every day about neuroscience and brain plasticity, about how young people learn. And the reality is that learning is jagged for all young people. And so we experience that probably in our own lives, that passion or motivation, or whether we feel like we're good at math or good at literature really varies. And one of the things that we know works in education is when you can personalize education to meet students where they are. So when I founded a school in Brooklyn, I was and continue to be a big fan of a researcher named John Seely Brown, who I think it's really important to contextualize the future, maybe in our own experience, which is he used to say, when young people are sort of navigating the future of learning, your parents were on steamships. They largely set course and didn't sort of turn the ship. Then we had us who were like on sailboats where we sort of knew what the course was, but we needed to skillfully tack. Today's learners are whitewater kayakers, meaning that the set of skills, competencies, and dispositions that we need to build alongside the learning sciences need to be able to help them read the current of what's happening well before the rocks show up in their path. And so I really think it's a helpful analogy, because I think one of the things we're tempted by in education is to be like, that's not the way I did it, or that's not the way my teacher did it, or that's not the way I learned. And what we really need to do, what I hope is a future that's enabled by AI, is a move from a schooling system to a learning system, like John Seely Brown talks about. A learning system that helps young people really become those whitewater kayakers who can constantly read those currents and adapt to a changing environment. We know that that is what young people are going to need. And so what does that look like? Well, in a schooling system, we often talk about this industrial age structure. So it's things like batches, grouping students together by manufacturing date or age, compliance, following a set curriculum on a set schedule, on a set location, making sure that the teacher is the primary source of knowledge, really focused on broadcasting information and recalled later for summative assessments, and then sort of known endpoints. And we're already starting to see this fray, that the goal is a predefined set of knowledge, often disconnected from real world application. And so when we listen to today's young people, they are saying schooling is something that is done to us. And what we want is something different. We want a learning system. We want the ability to have individuality, meaning learners sort of where they are on their own personalized pathways, agency, empowering learners to really pursue their curiosity, navigate that jaggedness through passion, skill development, again, moving the teacher from a purveyor of knowledge to more of a coach, a mentor, a facilitator of discovery, the ability to foster the skills like metacognition, asking powerful questions, fostering working in multifunctional teams, critical thinking. And then finally, sort of the emergent possibilities, which is instead of having that predetermined endpoint, really that learner is built to be a lifelong learner. Because what AI allows us to do is have learning be powered by what you want to learn and what you do yourself. And so when I think about the future, I think about moving from schooling to learning, moving from an industrial age model, which isn't fitting what we need today, with what our learners need tomorrow. And so while still holding on to those learning sciences, those skills, competencies, and dispositions that we know are really important for navigating into workforce, metacognition, working in multifunctional teams, and in the age of AI, managing and working alongside AI rather than AI replacing people. Susan, you and I have known each other a long time, so I'm sure you have some thoughts about what the future looks like for you too.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for that overview. I'm happy to weigh in. I'm just grateful to be part of this conversation today, and I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with that picture you painted. I'd like to emphasize some points in that. If we took a step back before we even think about what AI can do to a true educational ecosystem that's powered by evidence, if we were starting from scratch and using the evidence that we have on how students learn best, what we design would look nothing like the one-size-fits-all system that we have today. So I'm really coming at this from a point of view of deep systems change. And I'd like to emphasize this kayak idea. If you take a ski analogy, you can be any age and go out on a ski slope. You're going to start on the greens. You're going to start as a beginner. You're going to build those skills. You're going to work your way up when you're ready to the blues and the intermediates and then the blacks and the expert slopes. And that all requires building your muscles, learning different ways to navigate. And the key in our education system is about its purpose. And we really need to ask in this age of AI, in this age of robotics and automation, what is the purpose of our education system? And that should guide our North Star as to how we're going to build and design and how we're going to leverage AI to meet the moment. Building knowledge and skills for this future is going to require orienting our system towards ensuring success is the only option. What does that mean? If a student is learning and they miss a key concept, learning hinges on prior learning. How do we get them what they need in real time in a way that's relevant and engaging and meaningful? Erin talked about the learning sciences and how we think about youth development, but it's not batching students and then ranking them. If you think about, we wait for students to go through 13 years of schooling, K through 12, and boil it down to a single GPA where we rank and sort them. No. The future is about a system that supports human development, preparing lifelong learners to navigate a very different AI and robot-intensive world of work that's coming in all fields, in all domains. And we must emphasize human flourishing that's powered by AI. Where we're going to go in this conversation is talking about where that looks like. And more research can help us really hone in on how to do this best. And Victoria, you asked about what does this look like in the future? And I just ask us to imagine an education system that truly serves every learner at every stage of development, in every context, inside and outside of school, in their passions, through the intelligent, responsible use of AI, building knowledge and skills. So if we have this system that's built on evidence of students demonstrating their learning in real time and intelligence, AI can act as this invisible infrastructure. It's already invisible. We're carrying it around in our pockets. It's in our computers and our phones, but it can act as an invisible infrastructure that supports every layer of the education ecosystem. And as a nation, from a systems perspective, we have to think about investing in this infrastructure for technology, for education, using research and these promising practices. So whether you're a student, a teacher, an administrator, a family member, this translates into what an elegant personalized learning experience pathway where relevant evidence and insights on learning are surfaced in real time, precisely when decisions need to be made. And the system doesn't just digitize old models, it transforms them. It's a learning ecosystem grounded in the research, driven by learning science, designed to empower humans and not replace them. For students, we see personalized, adaptive, just-in-time learning, where AI helps identify each learner's unique starting point, where they are in the moment, whether they're ahead on pace, or if they're behind, and rather force fit all students into this one-size-fits-all grade level content that we have now. We can use AI to enable learning within the zone of proximal development where a challenge meets their readiness. And when students fill those gaps, we know they can accelerate. It opens up possibilities of when, how, where, how fast a student can learn per person, that personalized. And there's infrastructure with clear direction and guideposts, clear competency maps for the knowledge and skills. These offer pathways across K-12, post-secondary, college, and workforce. Those students know where they are every day in their learning goals and their learning objectives, and learning can happen anywhere. It can happen in the community, it can happen at work, it can happen in school, and it can happen anytime, anywhere. So students must demonstrate evidence of their learning, and assessments are meaningful to students to know. Recognition of learning to validate and badge or credit learning are absolutely important new capacities that are needed across the systems. This will give students greater agency over their learning while ensuring no one falls through the cracks. And for teachers, this help supports their ability to personalize learning. So with that, I will just say for the systems, we really can see how AI could provide a continuous improvement engine, provide more mature data models, support district-wide and statewide feedback loops, and support these frameworks towards profile of a graduate and human flourishing. Victoria, let me turn it back over to you. Hopefully that's painting a broad picture of how we can design our systems and start to think about AI acting as its infrastructure.
Thank you, Susan. Absolutely, it did. And it's making me feel like I am someplace in the future and not today in too many American schools. That is not what schooling is like in this moment. So let me talk a minute about this moment and bring to all of our audience's attention that I know, and certainly Susan and Erin know, and you both are involved in these conversations. I feel like every day I am receiving a new invitation about a conversation about AI in education. So it is all across education. People are talking. And what I perceive the conversation to be about, I'm no expert, that's why you all are here. I keep hearing about automating tasks and making things easier on teachers. And so I didn't necessarily hear that from you. You guys are catapulted someplace beyond that where that's almost a given. And so would it be okay if you take 30 seconds for all of our audience members to just ground us in what's today's mainstream conversation so that we give a nod to that to bring us all into the same space of what we're talking about now? So I don't know, Susan, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll jump back in. And right now, it's true, a lot of the conversation on AI in education is framed around task automation, and that's important. You know, saving time, creating lesson plans, administrative tasks, these tutoring bots help with grading, but it's a shallow end of the pool. And so what we're trying to emphasize is talking less about the tools, but also about the transformation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Susan that the conversation is incredibly shallow. And when we just anchor in things like productivity or efficiency or automating teacher tasks, we're going to be in trouble because there's so many more possibilities with AI in terms of empowerment. And, you know, I've often said this, that if chatbots are our killer use case in education, we've missed the boat, because it's the thing that is so disruptive around AI in education, and why you see folks having really present conversations about assessment is because we've designed learning structures around rote memorization. And what is AI really, really great at? Rote memorization. just regurgitating facts, not connecting across domains. And so one of the reasons I think we're struggling a little bit to get beyond that efficiency and productivity conversation, Victoria, in the spirit of radical candor, is because it's breaking the things that we've built our schooling system around. That if an AI can beat a summative assessment and do it in one domain very, very quickly, what do? How do we assess knowledge? We have not yet built a system that thinks about competencies and mastery versus summative assessments. And so when we talk about, I think, the present conversation, some of the tension I think that people are feeling is this rub against the very structures that AI has been built to break and supersede.
I appreciate that. Thank you both for grounding us, for acknowledging where we find ourselves in this moment, and Erin for also acknowledging there is tension, because there is. So I want to get back to this lofty place of the future that you all catapulted me to. And so my fundamental question is, how are we going to get there? So walk me through that. So who wants to go first? What bold actions are we going to see? Policy changes, etc. How are we going to get from this place through the tension into the white water? Because that's really where we want to go. Get out of the smooth sailing and let kids thrive.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick off and talk a little bit about the perspective from one of the alliances that Innovate EDU runs, the EdSafe AI Alliance. We were so lucky to have Susan as a fellow last year in the EdSafe AI Alliance. One thing that I want to acknowledge is I think you're seeing communities, educators, everyone say, let's not make the same mistake we made in social media. That's one thing I want to just acknowledge how far the conversation is coming. And so I think there's a lot of conversation around AI literacy that is really emerging. And that conversation is happening, in stages on Paris to the White House to kitchen tables around this country. And so folks really want to think about this idea of AI literacy. And I think as a sector, we need to commit to a strategic focus on AI literacy across all of our domains. So one thing I really want to caution folks about is just thinking AI literacy is computer science literacy. It's not. AI is an arrival technology. What that means is it's a foundational literacy. We're going to have to make sure that our English teachers and classrooms are as equipped to be literate in AI as our computer science classrooms. So we've released a blueprint for AI literacy from the EdSafe AI Alliance, anchored in the learning sciences, which really makes the case for a national call to action from policymakers, but also from implementers, states and local school districts around committing to AI literacy for all. I am deeply concerned that if we only have certain schools, certain populations focusing on AI literacy right now, we're going to see there not just be a digital divide, but a digital chasm. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really, really acknowledge this need. Susan tipped her hat to this earlier, and I appreciate it, this idea of public infrastructure. So in other sectors like healthcare, frankly, they've just done a better job. We have not built the type of public infrastructure in education, whether that's education research or in other domains like synthetic data sets or things that can help people test tools and make better choices in order to be able to use AI at education with a certainty around safety, accountability, fairness, transparency, and efficacy. You're going to hear me say those words over and over again, because at EdSafe AI Alliance, that's the SAFE framework, and that really grounds everything we do. And so this investment in needed public infrastructure in education is critical. And that's everything from continuing to support things like E-rate, which help us make sure that schools and libraries in rural communities and in urban communities are connected, all the way to things like the AI institutes that NSF and IES have come together to ask some foundational questions around efficacy research. And then the last thing that I will say when I talk about sort of what we need to be thinking about when it comes to AI and education in particular, is the thing that I think makes people feel a little bit squirrely, which is student data privacy. So the reality is we have to have guardrails and guidelines in our space, because as educators, we are stewards of minor data. And that expectation of continuing to be stewards of student privacy and student data, and having a framework that allows us to embrace innovation while also embracing safety, is really, really important. Safety is not the counterpolarity of innovation. It is a necessary and foundational agreement for us to be able to move forward. And just this morning, you're seeing this really, really come up when 44 states attorney generals. Can you get 44 states to agree on anything in this country right now? Not really, except they sent a letter to every major AI model talking about the way AI models were interacting with young people around relational AI and chatbots, and really not having good guardrails and guidelines around model welfare. So we need to be investing way more in the public infrastructure, way more in the research. And frankly, when I think about the SAFE framework, that E around efficacy and effectiveness is the weakest piece of our space. We do not yet understand what AI and effective teaching practices look like together, and how we make sure that we anchor in human connection, as Susan said, in order to ensure that future that Susan and I are talking about.
Yeah.
Right. Susan, take it away.
Yeah, exactly right, Erin. I was gonna go through quickly 10 strategic levers. Number one is this develop public AI infrastructure. So I couldn't agree more. And if you think about, I mean, the point that you're making and bringing home around the AI chatbots, if you think about the need to have data sets that are for education, that are for age appropriate use, that are grounded, those data sets are, and those language models are built on the research and evidence base of how students learn best, and how teachers can be using those to build on their deep and relational approaches in supporting students. Having open tools that democratize access to high quality research that teachers can use, and making sure, we talk about narrow AI or general AI and where these sets are, but we do need some serious investments that are focused on research and education. And for this conversation, I think that is a key takeaway. I think we need some formal structures as innovation hubs around experimenting with AI in education. And we're seeing some signals of the possibility of future investments in this area. I just hope we can double down on those investments and work with our state leaders who are overseeing our education in our states, our district leaders and folks on the ground, to be able to co-develop and co-design this future empowered by AI. The third area is really around redesigning learning models. What we're getting to in the systems design does have influence from policy, but in the end, it's around the practices that meet students' needs. And so breaking from this factory era model of grade levels and age-based cohorts, we can have information on how students are moving through these progressions. This gets back to some of the infrastructure. So like number 4 is about the competency frameworks through K through 12, through post-secondary into the workforce. We see this in other countries. We see this well developed around the world. We are just starting to have this conversation in the US, and it's an important one for having those guardrails on keeping high expectations for all students, on understanding the importance. There was a comment in the chat from Everett on building skills for lifelong learning, building skills to be able to move through productive struggle, building these skills that are going to be necessary throughout your lifetime. And yes, building the core content and skills that you'll need academically, but also into the workforce. Number 5 are around modernizing assessment systems. We have got to be able to recognize learning that happens anywhere, anytime, and that is about building capacity in people to be able to recognize authentic evidence of learning. It's almost like going back to the Socratic age. Technology advance and can do of level 2 on Bloom's, the more we're going to need people to do what absolutely is critical for deep thinking, problem solving, creativity, and moving on. So thinking very differently around what performance assessments, competency-based assessment, how the future of assessment can tie in learning inside and outside of school. Think about instruction inside and outside of school and assessment inside and outside of school. Totally rethinking the way we think of curriculum, instruction, and assessment in our system. You pointed to this, building ethical policy frameworks, the work that EdSafe has done. I just can't bring home how important the reports that you've published are. They are being used globally. They point to the same signals and are used in what OECD is doing. So we've got to build these ethical policy frameworks and build this infrastructure, focus on investing in human capacity, engaging our families and communities, and not be afraid to pilot, learn, and have that R&D built in on a rapid cycle so that we can learn as we develop and carry this on.
Okay, Susan, I know you put a lot out there. So thank you. Thanks to all of you who are hanging with us and listening. Erin and Susan, I would like to peel the layers of this conversation a little bit, pivoting in a different direction. You've touched on this a little bit. I think something that's on everyone's mind is how AI can truly catapult personalized learning. And so what I'd like to do is ask you to help us understand AI's potential for personalized learning. What does it mean for educators and what does it mean for students? And how is that AI going to help us really apply evidence for what works to help students learn and teachers teach?
Yeah, so first I'll say I think we're just getting started here. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I want to call out 3 really interesting bright spots because I believe that there are district leaders, there are organizations, and there are states who are leading here. And so I'm going to give you 3, but I wish I could give you all my favorites. So the first one I want to call out is a network of innovation schools in New York City, Urban Assembly, who's doing incredible work in using AI tools to give feedback to educators. So these are not student-facing tools. These are feedback tools for educators that give them like a whole host of coaching feedback, instructional coaching feedback around proven pedagogy and practice. Things like talk time, things like being able to help them scaffold. So it's not replacing the teacher. It's saying, here's the set of skills and instructional coaching that you need to strengthen your practice and your connection to students in the classroom. The work Urban Assembly is doing is a must watch because they're really interesting in that they are sort of built for innovation, but also built for safety. In one of the most complex regulatory environments that we have in this country, in New York City and New York State. And so if they're able to navigate that complexity and do it in a way that's really offering value to educators, it's an incredible promise. The second one I want to point out is a district who, you can't have a favorite because we work with districts all over. But if I did, no, I'm joking. But Gwinnett. Gwinnett has been leading the work in AI and education, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for 5 years. And I think the challenge that they have really taken on in terms of personalization is this idea of how do we drive AI literacy sort of across all domains. This is, I think, a really important thing for folks to hear. So they started down this path really thinking about AI and AI skills in the computer science paradigm. And what they have quickly realized is that's actually not what students, educators, or personalized learning demands. So that they really have to have an approach to AI literacy and personalization around learning for AI that's called swim, snorkel, scuba. So all students need to be able to swim. All educators need to be able to swim. Everybody in Gwinnett needs to be able to swim when it comes to AI literacy. Then there's some students and educators who are going to snorkel. They're going to go that level below, where they're going to build skills and competencies and dispositions that might be more around, AI use, AI ethics, machine learning. That's great. And then there's going to be another set of students, and maybe you're now getting into your computer science, your data science domains, those CTE pathways in high school, where you got to be able to scuba because you want to do coding or you want to emerge into a STEM field that's going to require that knowledge. And so this idea of everybody's got to do basic personalization, basic AI literacy, swim, and then we're going to have levels where people can, for both educators, students, where, folks can then snorkel and scuba. And then the last example I really want to pull out is Peninsula School District in Washington. So I've taken you from New York to Georgia to Washington. But there, the district has put together an interdisciplinary AI action research team. And they are creating and will launch an open access website of vetted AI tools, district guidance, classroom AI use cases that get right at that personalization, and also emerging research around what they're learning in that personalized learning to the education use case. And so one of the reasons I took you on that tour is because I think sometimes when we think about personalization, we think just about instructional materials, or we think just about students. But that's an example of where personalization for educators is improving pedagogy and practice, where personalization in terms of an approach is driving wide-scale AI literacy, or finally in Peninsula, where personalization in terms of what the district is producing those efficacy insights alongside those use cases that I think can really move us to the future. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Erin, I think you said that beautifully too. And just this idea of true personalization isn't new. It's been around for decades, right? Personalization at scale has always been an inspiration. Every teacher has been trying to do that. It's really hard with one teacher, with one book on one subject for 1 hour from one classroom. Now with AI, it feels like if we can reorient our system, it's finally possible. So AI can make this personalization scalable. It can give educators the capacity to tailor learning for students, to get that real-time data that's been manually so time-consuming, so difficult. You pull it from all these different systems and get these recommendation items. Now, you still need to have that professional judgment to take that feedback and decide what's best for the student. How do I know my students? And in some of the early research that we did in the last 7 years, we saw that teachers felt that when they were personalizing learning, involved in personalized learning environments, they knew their students better than ever. And students also reported that they felt like their teachers knew them better, but that they weren't still being given agency to have voice and choice and true personalization in how they were learning, when they were learning, where they were learning. And so hopefully AI tools and supporting educators toward personalization can help open up these ideas of what true student agency, building that student capacity for making choices towards this human flourishing. These choices are going to have to be made over a lifetime. I also think there's a lot of conversation in the education system, still the backlash over COVID, thinking about the powerful tools in AI, helping to identify student struggles early on, and in real time, matching students to evidence-based instructional strategies, the example that you gave with urban assembly and the tools that their teachers are having, so elegant. How can we see that as education using this evidence ecosystem in real time every day? So this is the big leap that we need. OECD published like 10 years ago a whole guide on the research and the learning sciences and how it ties to personalized learning, but it ultimately means true personalization. So how do we make this leap using AI from personalization as this buzzword that it's been to a truly embedded, evidence-based equitable practice powered by AI, led by students, parents, and teachers.
And if I can pick up on something you said, I think when we think about moving to this system of learning rather than just schooling, and I think somebody asked this in the chat, what does that mean? Is that allowing knowledge to be acquired and expanded? Well, I think like what we know right now is that students simply doing worksheets or, driving at just rote memorization is not getting us to the type of lifelong learning outcomes, the durable skills, the metacognition, the being able to work in multifunctional teams that the world of work is demanding. It's not in the future. What CEOs want right now is someone who has those skills, who has that type of judgment and can exercise judgment. So one of the things I'd love folks to really think about, and I'd love to see your responses in the chat, is, if AI sort of removes the need to do rote memorization, what could it unlock in terms of metacognition? What could it unlock in terms of those higher order skills? How can we imagine students really becoming thinkers, creators, advocators for themselves, rather than just regurgitating knowledge that a sage on a stage stands in front of a classroom and gives? That's the thing I think that is so exciting for me as a parent of a student with disabilities, for example. My young person doesn't always thrive on traditional assessments, and he's brilliant. And so how can he demonstrate that knowledge in a new and different way? How can AI help unlock his own brilliance and help other people see the brilliance that he has? And so that's really, I think, what we are hoping for, is this move from a system that isn't actually serving us, if we say the hard thing, isn't actually allowing students to connect knowledge across domains or, again, work in multifunctional productive teams. What could happen if we just unlocked the need to regurgitate facts? What's next?
Thank you, Erin. We are getting some questions, so I just want to take stock and acknowledge where we are in our own hour-long conversation. And of course, it's going quickly. We had planned, potentially multiple questions beyond where we are. Let me ask you, there's one that I have that's burning, and then we're going to turn to questions from the audience. So audience, get ready and start putting them in the chat. But I'm really focused on what came up in one of our earlier summer conversations, teachers as researchers, that's what AI is going to facilitate. And so that's a whole different kind of evidence, so to speak, because teachers themselves are going to be researchers, generating evidence for what works and pivoting and adapting. Can you speak to that? And maybe even to students as researchers, one or the other, but do so quickly, maybe a minute and a half each. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go quick because we released a paper yesterday, so I can be quick with my minute and a half, because there's like a huge paper on test beds as infrastructure, which is all about rapid cycle development and co-design for AI and education, which we feel like is the incumbent research model for this moment. And we're seeing a lot of success with this overseas with our partners in the UK and in Sweden and in Singapore, where teachers can be researchers. They can be co-designers of this technology. They can talk about the integration of pedagogy and practice and what it means to effectively scaffold to personalization and what would make a difference for them beyond efficiency and productivity. So check out that paper. And then I'll flip it to Susan real quick and I gave you like another 30 seconds, Susan, so you can take a whole 2 minutes.
I think I'll save some of my time for the audience too, but this notion of teachers having access to the evidence base, to the research. I know when I was in New Zealand on a fellowship, looking at how educators every morning got together, their teachers' lounge conversation was around sharing evidence and research and tying that in, and then they looped back during tea time in the afternoon and said more. And like there's a notion of time and grabbing that evidence and the learning and how it's connecting to your students, and what we have in this very industrial system of education in the US, and thinking about the amount of time that it takes teachers to manually grade, sift through spreadsheets, rely on like gut feelings, try to figure out where the evidence base is. Now, again, this is a narrow AI model, but with these data sets of evidence, you'll be able to prompt as a teacher experience or questions and have a range of evidence that's been vetted, produced, and be able to make those professional judgments, work and collaborate with others. In again, this is very early stage, but in Virginia, the state has invested $400,000 to work on regional trainings for building AI literacy, for building AI test beds, of building their own AI policies and their own training. And so they're actively using AI to do this and finding it. And the collaboration that is involved with checking and learning and problem solving and this teamwork in the creation of this future of an AI enabled learning system has, has produced just like it's making teaching more professional. And that's what we hope for, to be able to access those resources that they need more easily in a seamless way, in a frictionless way, and be able to really focus on the art of teaching and learning.
Beautiful. So I want to pivot now. We do have questions that have been coming in. Folks, if you have more questions, either put them in the chat or put them in Q&A. I see them coming up everywhere. So I'm going to start with what's in the Q&A. Is the concept of building knowledge and skills, or is it building skills that allow knowledge to be acquired and expanded? If it is the latter, then what are the essential skills that need to be mastered, and that's in quotes, and then how can AI assist in such acquisition? Who wants to tackle this first one? That is a real chicken and an egg question.
I mean, I could jump in the first part. It's both. It's both. That you definitely need to learn the skills on how to learn. That is a core skill. Skills on learning how to learn, learning how to navigate, and there are a whole host of skills. And that's why I'm extremely optimistic about the work that's happening in communities and in states on the profile of a graduate, where education in the United States was left out of the Constitution. It is states that set up what are the knowledge and skills students need to know and be able to do upon graduation. And essentially, this is curriculum redesign. That's what they call it in other countries. What do kids need to know and be able to do? What do young people need to know and be able to do to be successful in their future pathways? And these new profile of graduates are outlining sets of skills and the knowledge and the domains, and hopefully rethinking that curriculum redesign so then you can go in on competency-based and personalized learning. So then how can you leverage AI in all of the ways that we've talked about? But it's both.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about some of what we would consider essential learning science skills and what the science of learning and development equips us to be lifelong learners, like the ability to have metacognitive skills, discernment, the ability to work in multifunctional teams. Listen, AI cannot connect knowledge across domains. So how are we getting out of those like domain specific classrooms and helping students really navigate the complexity of bringing knowledge across domains together? And so when I think about the expansion of what we need to be doing, it's really what research already tells us we know, which is what sets young people up in the learning sciences to be successful, to be lifelong learners. We need to shift quickly, again, from rote memorization into this, again, domain connection. And so I hope that answers the question. And at the same time, I will say this, that of course, students need to be able to read, to write, and to do math. Just because we don't have just because we have text to speech, we don't we don't say, okay, you're not going to have to read anymore. So just, y'all, technology doesn't negate the need for those foundational skills. But again, we need to be shifting towards how we acquire the skills and the learning experiences that we have in American classrooms.
And I would just say
So,
reading, writing, mathematics, absolutely essential, no longer sufficient.
all right, thank you. So we have two more questions. We have multiple questions, but there are two that have been sitting there a while. I want you to pace yourself on your responses so that we can at least get two more answers. So be mindful of that with about 5 minutes left. Let me do the first one. How can districts and states foster a culture of evidence-based practice in AI literacy among educators to encourage the adoption of these tools? What knowledge, skills, and dispositions are necessary to equip educators in PD training programs and training to effectively leverage AI in evidence-based decision-making and practice? So real quick, response to that.
Read the blueprint for AI literacy. That's our answer at EdSafe AI, and that's the answer of 50 other experts in this space.
All right, thanks, Erin. Susan.
And I read it, and in there they talk about pilots for AI, prototyping, testing, building innovation hubs and networks, and getting together communities of innovative practice from the states and the districts to be able to and do R&D on this future.
All right, thank you. Let's do another one quickly. So this one, very hard question. In the current system, education, and in brackets, schooling, and learning exists to achieve an acceptable, and that's in quotes, an acceptable end, E-N-D. Is society really ready to accept student-driven, personalized learning? What will the acceptable end look like?
How about every student ready for their future? If you ask the business and the workforce right now, they are not finding that young people are ready. So is society ready? Is society ready for every student to have what they need to be successful? I sure hope so.
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a false dichotomy, which is like the system is already broken. Unemployment for young college graduates is the highest it's ever been. We're seeing the replacement of the first couple rings on the career ladder by AI. So we have and young people at phenomenal rates are saying that the endpoints that you imagine for me in college and post-secondary sort of structures aren't what I want anymore. So guess what? Young people are already voting about this. The workforce is already voting about this. So if we don't meet this moment as an education sector, and particularly around K-12 education and society in general, I'm very afraid for what it's going to look like for my Robert and Claire.
All right. So you guys did that so much faster than I thought. Thank you. Audience members, all our participants, any other burning questions? Anybody on my team? I know we got a couple of questions in advance. Anybody from the Learn team, we want to put those in the chat.
There's a question
All right,
in
so
the Q&A. I can read it out loud.
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, it's how can districts and states foster a culture of evidence-based practice in AI literacy among educators to encourage the adoption of these tools? That's part one, so I'll leave it there.
Well, I'll just say something you can do today. Two things you can do today. One, give your teachers time to safely experiment with AI tools and sort of large language models by being really clear about what the guidelines and the guardrails are. It's not sufficient to say, follow state privacy laws to a teacher. That is not guidance. That is just a cop-out. Say, do not put personalized, identifiable information to a large language model. Be specific and just begin the journey around AI literacy for your educators. That's what everybody could start today.
Yeah, and I do want to just circle back on Erin's work with the blueprint. Go through. There's some really great guidance for states, and absolutely essential time, resources, funding for capacity building for educators. We've got to provide professional development to help teachers leverage AI for personalized learning, train district and state leaders on the policy I mean, this is really going to change procurement. That's down in the weeds. This is an arrival technology. People are carrying it with them, as Erin noted earlier, and the change management that is going to come along with AI adoption is going to be very different. So we're talking about, second order, third order, different kinds of change. And our system is not ready for this. This is not how we have been preparing leaders. And it's okay. Let's just be honest with ourselves about what will be required to get us onto this next horizon and set ourselves up with rethinking funding and resource allocation and really digging in and centering ourselves on the research and evaluation and true continuous improvement in the way that I think we talk about it but haven't done in practice. I'm really excited for states and districts to dig in and start creating a learning agenda that can share feedback on these emerging promising practices. I think it's going to ultimately be transformative if we can help move all levels of the systems.
And I would just say the department has been a good partner here in sending out guidance that you can use Title II, Title IV dollars. You can use existing funding streams you have to do AI literacy work. And so the department just released that guidance in August. And so they have been a good partner in saying, you have some available monies. If you would like to use those available monies, that is an acceptable use and that is within our guidance. And so that is a great step forward on the professional learning for educators.
And we're going to have to leave it on that note. So to Susan and Erin both, thank you very much. What an exciting conversation. Thank you. And to all of the folks who joined us, thank you very much.